Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today we'll masech this Chulin daf Chav Ches. We're going to begin on Chav Ches Amud Aleph, the third line from the top. So we are now in the second parak, which introduced yesterday to the distinction between a bird. When it comes to the shechita, only one siman is necessary. In fact, only rove of one siman. And when it comes to a animal, you have to cut the majority of two simanim. Tashma, molak basakin. Let's say a person is malika. Now, malika in the Beis HaMikdash is supposed to be done properly with the fingernail of the kohen. Instead, it was done basakin with a knife. So Rashi says, "Of konshim basakin nevela, the ein malika el b'sipaydin." Since you're supposed to use the nail, instead you use a knife, even though you did a superb job doing the shechita, that is not the proper way of doing the shechita for an ol sa'of or an chata sa'of, and therefore it's considered to be tameh, and it's an avela. So therefore, a person who would swallow and eat this would become tameh. Now we had this question in yesterday's daf. Is shechita from the Torah with regard to birds? Certainly by animals it is. So it's something we've been going back and forth. Now, he granted nami tavale shidra mafrekes havile treif. Now we know that if you would break the spine, the backbone of the bird, that would typically make it a treifa because it wouldn't be able to function and live for 12 months. So tahani lo sakin lo tahar midin nevela. So why don't we say that the knife at least should be able to make it into like a treifa? It should maybe not make it a nevela, that it's not going to be matama b'gana mesabliya. At least let it do something. Says Rashi, the tarfa sheshachta enu matama nechirasu zuhu shchitasa. We know v'ov nechirasu zuhu shchitasa. So we know that when it comes to a treifa, as opposed to a nevela, a treifa is not matama b'gana mesabliya. It doesn't have the same dinim as a nevela. So why don't we at least give it that status? So who Sanya, we learned in a brisa. Rabbi Lezer Kapper Rabbi Yomi Matam. What does the pasuk say in Devarim? Ach kasher yoichel sasviv gaimer. When you consume and eat this non-domesticated animal, a deer, says Rashi. This is referring to psuli hamikdashim. Sheniftu b'muman, that if you have a carbon in which it develops a mum, so therefore you can redeem it. Question is, why are we bringing down these animals specifically? It's come to tell us something on both sides. So what's the connection? Just like when it comes to a carbon which is puzzle, and therefore we have it develop a mum, and therefore after it develops a mum you could redeem it. So b'shchita, so we say that psul mikdashim is with shchita. So av sviv ayil b'shchita, so to see an ayil, also we will do shchita. Says Rashi del Elma he krux of karcha. It says clearly slaughter it. So that's obvious that that's the din, that it must be done with shchita. And here's the key line, that when it comes to a bird, there is no din shchita min ha-Torah. So Mantan Rabbi Lezer Kapper, who disagrees, Rabbi. The sign Rabbi Omer, you shall slaughter as you were commanded. It's coming to tell you that he was told that it's necessary when it comes to the shechita behema that you should cut both the kan and the veshet, and when it comes to a bird, it's necessary to cut the majority of one. Okay, so again, this is a back and forth whether or not oif shechita b'oif is midivri Torah, midivri sefer. So echad b'oif. So our Mishnah again said that when it comes to a bird, all you have to do is cut one siman. Now there's two simanim on an animal, on a bird or an animal: the kana, the windpipe, the trachea, and the veshet, which is the food pipe or the esophagus. Apparently, you can cut either one. Itmar, Rav Nachman Omer, O veshet o kana. Now, that's one opinion. However, Rav Adabar Abba Omer, no, veshet velo kana. The veshet is the siman that you need to cut when it comes to a bird. Says Rashi, miyuchad shibasimanim, hu shechayois behema toibo. It's the one pipe in which the life source of the animal comes from it. Even the smallest hole in the veshet will make it treif. The ulkana ademisik ruba. When it comes to, and it's kind of like hard to understand, but when it comes to the air pipe, when it comes to the trachea, it's not a treifa with a tiny little puncture. So obviously we see that puncturing the veshet is more substantial, and therefore according to the Shita, he says no. When it says rove of one, it doesn't mean either the veshet or the kana, specifically the veshet. Our Mishnah says echad, doesn't specify which one, either one. Echad koldahu doesn't mean the smallest amount, but it means either one. Ravada Barava Eimer Veshet Vulkana. So my echad miyuchad. It just means the special one, the unique one, which is the veshet. Siman shachan atzayin gergeres pegima dechatas oif. So obviously this is something we're going to go back and forth. What the din is by a bird, is it either the kana of the veshet or dafka the veshet? So meisvei. So the Gemara asks the following question: shachan is a veshet, which seems to be, when it comes to a bird, the number one choice. V'achakach nishbata ha-gorgeris, and then afterwards the gorgeris, the trachea, which is the windpipe, that got pulled out. It became dislodged. Shera. Now, why is it kosher? Because by a bird you only have to cut one siman, and it says specifically that first you cut the veshet properly. So therefore, once you cut the veshet, what happens afterwards doesn't matter because it was already a kosher shchita. However, nishbada gargaris v'achach shachad is a veshet psula. If first there was a dislodgement of the trachea and only afterwards you did the shchita, it's puzzle, because again it has to be that you did the shchita first properly. Okay, so that's point number one. Then the Gemara says shachad is a veshet, which again is the right way to do it. V'nimsis gargris shemuta, and then all of a sudden afterwards you examined it and you noticed that there was a dislodgement of the trachea. We don't know when it happens. So this actually is a practical case. Things happen like this. And they said that we always go strict. Now, by a case of suffix, we go strict, but that's not the point here. It only mentions the case of what came first, the dislodging of one of the simanim before or after the shchita of the veshet. But it doesn't talk about, for example, the shchita of the kana and then the dismantling or the dislodging of the veshet. Must be because cutting the kana is not enough, and therefore it would always still, it would be possible even if you did that first, apparently. So that's a raya to the shita of Rav Adabarava, and it's a kasha on Rav Nachman. So how does we get out of this? We're answering no. It's not necessarily telling us that one works and the other one doesn't. It's mentioned in Gergeris Avida Lishtemute. It's just a practical situation that it's usually the Gergeris, it's the trachea that becomes dislodged. So it's only mentioning like a mas, not just mashahoya, but something which is milsa the shchicha, something which is more common, that's something which takes place. But in the event that somehow it happened the other way around, and you had shechted the kana, and then there was a dislodging of the veshet, so then in that situation maybe it would be kosher. Tashma, shachat shnei chatzoy simanim boif. Let's say you cut two of the simanim, the kana and the veshet, but only halfway, psula, because 50% is not enough. It's got to be at least rove. Now, even though you could say, well, 50% plus 50% is a lot more than just cutting one siman 51%, doesn't make any difference. It has to be rove. Certainly, it wouldn't be kosher for a behema because you need 2 rows. Rabbi Yehuda Omer ba'oif shishchatas haveshet yes havaridin. It's necessary that you have to shecht the veshet, the esophagus of the bird, but that's not enough. One sim is not enough. You also have to shecht the jugular veins, which apparently we see this machlokas. But what's the machlokas? Only about whether or not you also have to slaughter the viridin, the veins, the jugular veins, to be able to get all the blood to come out. But apparently it's pretty clear that when it comes to cutting, everyone agrees that it's got to be at least the veshet, not the kana. No, mishum the veshet samach havaridin. The reason why we mention the case of veshet is because it's near the jugular vein. But if you cut the kana, maybe it's also good. Tashma shlachat chatzi gargaris. Let's say a person shechted half of the trachea, which maybe is not the right one to do, but also you shechted half of it. And then you delayed and didn't shecht until sometime later. The gomer, then you completed the act of the kana. So my la ba'oif. So we see this by a bird. Umay gomer gargaris, that you completed just cutting the trachea. So actually, now this is approved to Rav Nachman. Lo, bebehema. We're talking about an animal. Umay gomer shchita kula, that you complete the entire shchita. So it's not necessarily a raya. It's talking about the oath and whether or not it's only the veshet or whatever. No, it could be talking about a behema. Okay, fine. Tashma harshahi chatzi kana pogum. Let's say you already have half of the shchita, half of it already opened up. The ha'isavul of kol shehu v'gamer shchita sukshera. We had this before, that you discover that already was 50% already open, and then afterwards you did the shchita, which means that when you did the shchita, then you caused it to reach the threshold of rov. So therefore it's good. My lab oif, my gomer l'kana. That even with a kana, with one siman, even the kana would work. Well, bebehemo my gomer laveshet. So again, it's not necessarily talking about an oath, because we're talking about hema. Tashma, ketzan molkin chatas oath. So how do we do the malika process of the avoda of the chatas oath? So the Gemara says that we are chaytech shedra mafrekas, because it's coming from the mul oidif, from the back of the head of the bird, so it will break through the spinal column. Below roiv basar, as we said before, it has to be below roiv basar, not cutting through the majority of the basar, because otherwise you'll make it into treifa. Ad shemagila veshet o lakana. Now it's explicit over here. It says it could be either the veshet or even the kana. Hagila veshet o lakana. Again, it says either one. Chaytech siman echad, you can cut one of them. Rob basar imo, then you can cut the rob basar. Uva oila. Now, when it comes to chatas of, it's different than it also, because chatas of cannot be yavdil. Our oilas of, we need to separate the bird. So shnayim or rov shnayim. So we see when it comes to an osa of, there's a requirement, either you have to cut both simanim or and not rov, or maybe only rov and not more. There's a machlokas over there in the first parak. So that's what you're supposed to do when it comes to the oilos of. Shnaim or rov shnaim. So tiyuf to the Ravada Barava. This seems to be a direct kasha on a refutation of Ravada Barava, who says no. It has to be davka shechting the veshet and not the kana. What are you talking about? It says explicitly or this or that. So tiyufta, you're right. So tiyufta, which apparently means the halacha that you should be able to cut either one of a bird. So my havala. So what became of it? What do you mean my havala? It's a tiyufta. So tashma. So my havala. So my havila kidikamer. You already said before. Like we already have a by the case of Malika, a clear tiyufta that either one works. So no dilmashani hasam. Maybe it's in the case of Malika. Diika sheder mafrekas. Because since over there you're breaking the neck and the spinal column already, so maybe only when it comes to Malika will Taka say that cutting the kana is sufficient. However, shchita, where you're not breaking through, you're not killing it are causing it to almost die with it cutting through the mafrekas, you're cutting from the front. So maybe there you taka need to cut the majority of only the veshet and not the kana. So it's not necessarily a raya. It's definitely a raya when it comes to malika, but not when it comes to shchita. Okay, so what's the din? So Tashma Bahu Bar Avza de Habibe Rava. So there was this an avz, like a goose. There was a bird that was presented to Rava. Also ki mesamse memasmes karehu dama. So the neck was full and covered. It was basically bleeding from the neck. Says Rashi, you need to check out the simanim of this bird. Maybe there was a break in the kana, there's a hole in the veshet, which we said even a small hole in the veshet will make it a treifa. Says Rashi, Mishum Safik Drusa will boy Lamidka. He didn't need to check it was Drusa, the Talina and Bekalba or Bekanya. Okay. It could be a stick, could have been a dog. So we're not concerned about Teresa. We're more he was concerned about was there some type of hole or something there. So Amarava, Hechinevet. So what should I do as we continue with Chav Chesamud base? So Nishchate. So you should check this bird. V'hader Nivdike. Then afterwards you could examine above the base Hashita and below it to see if there was any problems with this animal. This bird. So Dilma b'makam nekav kashachet. Maybe the place where the hole was is where he shechted it. So nivdike v'hadav nishkate. So and that's you can't do that because it's not going to help because maybe once you shecht it, maybe the place where you shecht it was the place which had the hole. So you're not going to detect the hole. So maybe nivdike v'hadav nishkate. So maybe do the examination before the shkita. B'hoyim ralba veshet ein lu b'dika mebachutz el mebifnim. When it comes to the veshet, you can only examine it in the inside. And the only way you can actually examine it is once it is shechted. Says Rashi, panimi lavan. There's the inner membrane is white, so therefore you won't be able to examine it until after the shechita. So Rabbi Yosef nivdeke l'kana. Why don't you at least first examine the kana, the windpipe, the trachea, the nishchate l'kana, the lichshrei, and then shech the kana, which is why we're trying to bring a proof over here, and then it'll be kosher. The hodner, and then afterwards, because the veshet you can only do after the shechita, so lavchul leveshet, turn the veshet inside out, v'livdike, and examine it. Now, what is going on over here? He's saying that you can shech the kana. Apparently, the kana is enough to make it good. So, Rabbi Chacham Yosef Bari B'Trefus Krav Yochanan. So this guy is quite knowledgeable, an expert in the dinim, like Rav Yochanan. Alma, so what do you see? Echad de Kaimer Ohai. The fact that he mentioned the case of a kana is proof that it doesn't have to be the veshet. Either one is acceptable, like Rav Nachman. Again, we did have a tiyufta, but again, we were able to get out of that tiyufta. It was only maybe by Malika. Okay. Let's see a couple of questions, starting off with question 5. Be'eze min hasimanim miskayamin shchita b'oif, b'malika b'chata sa'oif. So, when it comes to shchita of the simanim of a shchita of a bird, l'chad man de'omer b'veshet davka, right? It has to only be the veshet. The other one says, or the kana or the veshet. But by Malika, everyone says, or the kana or the veshet. And maybe it's because there's no machlokas, maybe by Malika, because it's already quite dead. It's dying. Because you already cut the mafrekas. Okay. TA 26. Ha'im mahani ba'ov shchita o Malika b'kana below veshet. So as we said, by shchita as machlokas malika, it definitely works according to everyone. Okay, that's TA 26. We'll see what I wrote. Well, oilus of divrei okana ovet or the veshet. Avol yesh machlokas stam Im oze or rak haveshet. Halacha o kana oveshet kashel o rov simin be'echad sagi. Okay, all right. That's the correct answer. TB 29. Bar Avza the Mamasmes Koyodama Muluchach Saber Badam, its neck was filled with blood. Sheikh din Hakana V'loi Haveshet. So he said Shech the Kana and not the Veshet. Why? Why doesn't he say Shech the Veshet? Okay. So I got this wrong. So the answer is by the Veshet, Efsher Livdoik Oto Ella Liachar Shchita. And I'll write what it says in Rashi. Bikrum Hapanimi Lavan. Okay, so that is the correct answer. That's TB29. TB29. So let's see. Vesha en bedikim b'chutz el b'bifnim. Okay, good. All right, let's keep on moving. So let's see the next piece. Rabbi Yehuda Omer ad sheyishchit. So he said, Rabbi Yehuda says, until you shecht. So what is that referring to? So Rabbi Yehuda says you have to shecht the viridin. We said the jugular vein, again specifically by the bird. So on this, the Gemara says, the only time we require to actually remove the blood by cutting through the viridin is only by a bird. Because you can roast the bird entirely whole. So therefore we have to get all the blood out of it. Since you're going to be cutting it up limb by limb, because the blood's going to come out that way. Remember the time of the Rabbi Yehuda Mishum Damu. The reason why you have to cut through the viridin is because to get the blood out, but not Rabbi Yehuda Eimer ad shishkat as viridin. He says you have to cut the jugular vein ema ad shinakev as viridin. Why doesn't he just say until you make a hole in the viridin? The blood will come out that way. So my ad shishkot ad sheyinko b'shashchita. You're right. It's true. It doesn't have to be this whole huge process. The whole purpose is just to get the blood out. So all you really do is to make a small hole, but we want you to do it specifically b'shas shchita, and not afterwards, as we'll see why in a second. Tashma v'ridin b'shchita de Rabbi Yehuda. So aim of v'ridin sarich l'nakvan b'shas shchita. You have to make just puncture a small hole to get the blood out. De Rabbi Yehuda. Tashma amul Rabbi Yehuda mi'acher shel chuskru v'ridin. Since you already mentioned the whole notion of the purpose of the viridin is only to get the blood out of the bird, so mali b'shchita, mali shelo b'shchita. What's the difference if you do it at the time of shchita? Right? You don't need shchita. If you already did the shchita of the animal by cutting through its simanim, so then you don't need the knife to do the cutting of the viridin. So ha'chikaimer law. Mali l'nakvan b'shashchita, mali l'nakvan shul b'shashchita. What's the difference if you make a hole, because all you do is trying to get the blood out, even to do it shul b'shashchita? But Rabbi Yehuda says no, it should be done during the shchita. Why? Savar b'shashchita asidam d'chayim. We know that during the time which you're doing the shchita, there's a greater likelihood that you'll be able to get the blood out because it's hot. Shul b'shashchita lo asidam d'karer. It's cold or it's congealed. In other words, he's just giving a practical explanation that if you wait too long to cut through the viridin, it's not going to cause the blood to come out properly. But if you do it b'shas shchita, then more blood will come out, which is our goal. Question 6. Shchitas viridin Rabbi Yehuda him bebehema o ba'of o ba'atam. So he said it's only by a bird in order to get the blood out, but by behema, since you're cutting it to pieces, so it's not an issue. Question 6b. Shchitas viridin Rabbi Yehuda heim shchita davka v'lo b'nekiva v'im shashchita davka. So he said he wants you to do it specifically at the time of the shchita, because that's when the blood is still flowing and you're going to get the blood out. However, the truth is, even a nekiva, a hole, a small puncture of this would also be sufficient. Okay, let's keep on moving. So, by Rabbi Yomi, Varidin Rabbi Huda, which again requires you're supposed to cut through, Shabehen, Doris Behen, Mahu. What if the 5 hilchos shchita you violate when it comes to that? Notice you did the shchita, but then you delayed or you pressed, or things of that nature, chalada, ikr, sarmaleahu saba, hachiyam Rabbi Lazar, v'yirmel some say it was amrulahu saba Rabbi Lazar, hachiyam Rabbi Yochanan, menakven b'kaitz, v'hein ksherin. You don't actually need a knife. You can just puncture it with even a thorn, is in any way to make a hole in the viridian so the blood will come out. Which is clear that we don't care about the halachos of the five halachos. That's specifically by shchita or makbid. However, the cutting of the viridian, which is done after the shchita, b'shah shchita, but after you already did the shchita, anyways, fine. Telling us to Rav Chisda, shachat shnei chatzoy simonim. You shechted 2 of the halves, but if it's possible. Then tzacham behema. Rabbi Huda Omer ba'oif an shishchedes ha veshet ves havaridin. Okay, question 7a. Ha'im l'devarim the lahalan mechsa havi karoiv. Is mechsa like roiv? So shchita b'chatzi simonim. Clearly, we know shchita lo havi karoiv. It's not a shchita. All right. If you only did 50% is not the same as rov. Chatzi yacha b'oif v'chul. So inmar Rav Omer mechsa karoiv. And therefore that would actually still be good, even though it only did 50-50. Rav Kahana Omer mechsa enu karoiv, and therefore it's possible. So Rav Omer mechsa karoiv, hacher malei rachman al Moshe. This is what Hashem said to Moshe: Lo tishayir ruba. You should not leave over the majority unshechted, which is mashman. As long as the majority of it is not shechted, even though you only shechted 50%, then it's fine. Rav Kahana enu karoiv, hacher malei rachman al Moshe. Moshe was told shachad ruba, shech the majority. And if you shech 50%, it's not enough. Simon chatzi k'tin and gorgus pigima. Tanan chatzi echad b'oif. If you cut half of a bird, the echad v'chatzi b'behema shchita subsua. Now it's pretty clear. Niyamer mechsa karoiv. So my puzzle ha'avid leim roiv. Right? Understand? If you did half, so half is like rov according to you. So midorabanan. In other words, midoraisa he holds in some machlokas that midoraisa it has to be. It could even be 50%. Shchita could even be exactly 50%. However, midorabanan we require rov. Why? Because dimul lasil mevid palga. Because if you don't do 50%, you do 49%. It's definitely not good. 50% midoraisa it's good according to the shita. But midorabanan, we don't want you to rely on it, because if you do that, then you'll end up not even doing half. Amrav katina tashma chok l'shnayim. So let's say it is divided into 2. What is this talking about? So Rashi says a tanur, referring to an oven shenitma, an oven that became tameh. Ein lo tahara ela nititza. By smashing it is how you make it tahar. Ve'im nishtayir rubo. Let's say you broke in half, and the majority is left. Shalem lav netitzahu. It's not netitza. Smashing means that there's not a whole piece, which is a majority piece. So let's say you broke into 2. The hain shovin, they're equal. Shneim tamein. While if yeshul samsem, you can't be mitzamsem. It can't be exact. Oh, actually, it's samsem. Let's say academically somehow we could know 100% it's exactly 50%. Tahirin. So my tahirin zil hacha ikaruba zil hacha ikaruba. Right? If apparently you should require it's like a majority. So why do we say that 50% actually is good? So it must be because 50% is not rov. So Omer Rav Papa Trey Ruby Bechad Mana Leka. 2 rows with 1 thing. We do not say this. Says Rashi. Di'i hai ruba hai miuta. When it comes to 2 things, you can't have this one's 51% and this one's 51%. Doesn't exist, right? You can't have two rows with one thing. You can't have more than 100%. So one's 51%, the other one can't be 51%. So therefore, in that case, we'll say that 50-50 take could work if you're mitzamsim. In shchita lo husker rov el b'chaticha. So it's a piece. Karina palgaroy chitoch. No one can contradict it, right? It's possible that 50% is really rov when it comes to the shechita. However, when it comes to 50% of the oven, you can't say, well, it's really 51%, because then you can't have two pieces that are both 51%. So that's basically the idea. All right, let's see, maybe there's another question over here. Question, Gimel. Tanur shechok l'shnayim latar b'netzitza him efshel etzamsim. So if you are able to be mitzamsim, so in that situation we say having netzitza, it is considered to be broken, right? Right? Again, that's what it says. Ha efshel etzamsim to hirin, right? So we see that it's considered to be 50-50 in that situation, and obviously that means it's not rov, right? It's not rov, right? So it isn't rov, since you can't have two pieces, two rovs, let's call it 51%, on the same thing, right? Because you can only get to 100%. So therefore, when it comes to this, we'll say, yeah, it's 50%. It's not 51%, right? But so that's the idea, that because, let's see this again, lo havi karoiv, havi netitza, it's considered to be broken because broken has to be less than rov, or else it's not considered to be broken. Okay. Let's maybe see another question. I don't know. Let's see. TA27, no. TB30, no. Done.